Let's do what we can to review Lincoln here. I guess the first thing is I am going to assume that there is not a ridiculously hard, like a ridiculous level of imbalance in this game. My personal experience is it felt like there was, but I'm going to assume, since there are people who like the game a lot and have played a decent number of plays of it, since other reviewers who presumably have played it more than twice solo, have played it in a post-play to test it out, etc., seem largely positive on it, that it is reasonably balanced. I did see someone who posted their win-loss total for the various sides. I'm assuming opposed play, but I can't guarantee it. 12 wins for the Confederates, 2 for the Union in their comments. But again, I don't think a game that's that unbalanced would receive the kind of positive views that it's had. I'm not saying that it's, stunningly positive across the board. Obviously, it doesn't have a huge raw Board Game Geek score or anything like that. So there are people who do not like this, and they may be people who played it a couple of times and said, I can't see how to win, as the Union. And I'm largely in that category. And what that means, I suspect, is that maybe there is a clever and balanced game here, but the onus is so heavy on the Union player, or you have to know a certain strategy in order to move forward. In general, a means of effecting successful attacks that it's inherently, it's going to be unbalanced for the first few plays. That wouldn't be terrible if it was a really, really detailed simulation. I mean, hey, that's great, but the story's good enough to tell you something that it's okay that, like, one player has to really, really work a lot harder to get there. The other thing that I suspect is, well, if that first part of the game is so hard, and it really, the Union making it through that first deck, I can't imagine it being better than 50-50. That kind of has to mean that the later parts of the game become significantly easier for them. I'm not sure. Again, that may depend on a wider strategic view of the game. If the Confederates expend all their effort trying to stop the Union from winning in that first deck, they may be so weakened that the game is essentially over by the Union making it through the first deck. On the other hand, if they hold off, maybe, and don't take the easier choice to victory, as far as I can see, maybe they'll be more powerful and able to grind things down and not make it so apparent at the end. Never having gotten out of the first deck, though, 2 plays only, solitaire both. And there are definitely problems with playing solitaire. This is a game where one of the factors of it, one of the features that you have, is the ability to attack and maybe bluff and fire off a second attack. Or there's a few other things that you might do that kind of require sort of a pre-planned deception of the opponent, as opposed to the way that I was playing, which is I don't look at what my opponent has and I launch my attack. And now my opponent knows, or I know, as I move into that seat, maybe how good the attacking card is. But, I make some assumptions, and actually, to tell you the truth, throughout the game, I was making assumptions with the Confederates that are probably untrue. In fact, that the Union may have a 4-point card. I don't know if they have any. They have very, very few. And at some points, I made the assumption that they might have a 5-point leader card, which I'm pretty sure they do not in that first deck. So I expended heavier resources than maybe I could have brute force calculated and said, no, that's not going to be the issue. All right. On the other hand, there's something I really, really like about the play of the game. What I see of it. You've got a CDG type style game where it's very, very easy to kind of figure out what things you want to do, but the board is not so so complex that you're having to puzzle too much about which action to do. I felt like I could make my decisions in real time. It's richer than games like 13 Days. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to go there. I was going to say maybe even richer than the decisions in Twilight Struggle. But it's not up there where I have to, spend 15 minutes figuring out what I'm going to do. Which is one of the problems I have with kind of some of the CDGs and the coin games and stuff. Some of the times I feel like I'm spending a lot of effort on every single decision. And I don't believe that should ever be the case in a game. Personal style of play, really. I want to be able to make my decisions fairly quickly. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Maybe this isn't intended to be that way, but it felt that way to me. So, what about the components? The board is quite nice, actually. Nice hard board. And doesn't take up a whole lot of space, but covers most of the effective area. Yeah. The cards, I've already mentioned before, they're really wonderful, really nicely shuffleable. The presentation on them, the backs, I don't like the imagery on the back, and the imagery on the front. It's not really confusing, but it's also not, it doesn't really jump out at you and say, these are the things you can do. The colors, etc., make it so that, I don't know. I feel like I'm spending a little bit too much effort puzzling out what's on the card. Like a picture of a face means something. I don't know. The counters are excellent. The rule book is a piece of shit. The rules, and that's Martin Wallace for you. The rules are written in kind of an ambiguous sort of way. It takes some puzzling to figure out what the hell they mean. I think I was playing it right. But the way he's handling the split spaces and what happens within them, I really had to make guesses on some of those. However, after I looked at other people's complaints and rules threads and stuff, I'm like, yeah, I came to what I think is the conclusion that those threads did. I didn't want to dig in too deep. But yeah, the rules are pretty damn bad. And that's not surprising. For whatever reason, Martin Wallace can't write rules well. He needs someone else to take over and redefine and rewrite the rules for him. And that's not going to happen. He's too big a name. He thinks he knows how to write rules or something. I don't know. Everybody in the world tells him, you can't write rules. You'd think he would deign to, pay some small portion of his royalties towards getting someone to clean up his rules act in general. Like I said, I really do actually like the play. It's a simplified, it's a presentation of the CDG that's a little bit different version. Instead of just a number with which you can do certain things and a possible event, it's instead a series of different choices on each card. as to what you can use it for. I like the idea of spending cards as discards in order to activate other cards, and in this case, that's the troop cards. I like the way that you have to make a choice to pull cards out. I don't know what the hell's going on in my room. It's just my neighbor doing something. I like the way that you pull cards out of the game for the reinforcement effects. That really limits the number of these big units you can produce. And that is sort of the deck destruction for whatever it's worth, which is, hey, look, you can, if you're going to build a unit that gets rid of that card, do you want that card out of your deck next time around? In some cases, the question is pretty easy. The card is not useful for too much other than building that unit. In other cases, though, the thing that you're building, or diplomacy for that matter, is a really good card and you can't really afford it. Now this actually brings up an interesting thing, which is the blockade versus seizing ports. I don't know how to look at this historically, right? So, first of all, there's no strict time in the game. But the ports that the Union can seize at least the forts surrounding them were in Union hands early. This one was taken very early and has a +2 bonus to defense and a unit in it. It may be the easiest because it only has a 1-point unit, but still, net value, it's the same as these other ports. And the problem is that the Union, part of the Union blockade functionality was to grab some of these things. And the question that comes to mind is, should you be focusing on the blockade with your naval cards? Which is what I tried in the first play, and my immediate reaction was, I guess I'm supposed to take one of these 2-point ports instead. And then I tried that in the second play, and yeah, that didn't work either. Basically, getting past that first deck where you have to have 2 victory points is really the hard point. You could win in the West, and that might not be the hardest thing to do. You could go for Fredericksburg instead of one of the Western things, but that's a pretty tough slog. Newmarket may be a little easier, but again, you've got this kind of confused mess up here that's hard to navigate through. So probably your points are going to come from the West if you're able to do it. The problem is the Confederates always have better shit than you. So you almost have to really build up a huge force in order to launch the attack. And building up that huge force eats up your cards. It eats up your hand. And I don't think I play, obviously, I could have gone further with it. And instead of launching as many attacks, which is what really hurt me, I could have just tried to build up. But the truth is the Confederates can build up too. They can respond to your build up. And that is, so in order to get through the deck, you have to do something that's completely ahistorical. It's almost like, I tried historical things, right? I tried pressing attacks and pushing the blockade. Again, it's hard for me to tell what the historicity of the blockade is, right? Is pushing the blockade what the Union historically did early in the war, or is seizing territory what they did early? And it's not clear to me. Like, they did not capture Savannah and the area around it. So I feel like maybe that's the blockade there. They did capture New Orleans fairly early and the area around it. And is that in the first deck? don't know. You know? But yeah, what you cannot do is launch a bunch of small attacks and expect to get anywhere. And historically, a bunch of small attacks is what the Union actually did, you know? And they made it through the first deck in the historical situation. So you can't use your historical knowledge to guide you in the game. What you kind of have to do, I guess, is, you know, draw on experience from the game itself. Now, in 2 plays, I was not clever enough to come up with a, this is what I should be doing. So, you know, I'm not thrilled with the idea of a game which does not promote historical play. That's always my fallback, right? I try to play, I don't necessarily expect a deep historical simulation, but I try to play it using historical moves, and I should expect a historical outcome. Well, the Union didn't surrender one way or the other after a few failures. So how did they get their victory points? Did they get their victory points with the blockade table? Did they get their victory points through... They sure the hell didn't get Fredericksburg. They may have gotten down to here. Maybe. Because they did push quite far in the east. I mean, honestly, they grabbed Fort Monroe, which should be as hard as the 2-point cities, but is worth nothing. They got Fredericksburg eventually. I don't know if I'd call that first deck. But I don't know how else you'd call it, because, yeah, they pushed down to right outside of Richmond. And I don't see a way there without getting the Fredericksburg space. There's no connection here, no connection there. So this becomes the centerpiece of the launch. So, you know, the Union were able to batter their way through after losing at Manassas, and then the Confederates just basically letting them through. This is not going to be represented in the game at all, but nor is anything like the Union type of strategy. And that leaves me with okay, so I've got a game that kind of says it's the American Civil War, but just doesn't feel like it. And I don't know what to say about that, you know? I mean, it might be an interesting game. My feeling was playing it as a game, figuring out the Union strategy to survive that first deck didn't come to me. I'm too stupid for that. But I was tainted by, you know, trying to do things that historically got them through that part of the war. So, you know, it warns you it's not a simulation, you know. The problem is I find things like the Milton Bradley skirmish to be more of a simulation, in the sense that, at least if I try to do things that feel like things that were tried, I'm not going to lose the game automatically by it. Like, there's some secret that's not unlockable by history in this game. Something that you have to violate history completely in order to do as the Union to make it through the early part of the war. And the truth of the matter was, other than the threat to Washington, which apparently existed in a much stronger form in the prototype that totally broke the game, other than the threat to Washington across the Potomac, there really was nothing, you know, there was nothing really big that the Confederates could do that would have ended the Union chances of the war to such an extent that they would have surrendered. So I don't know what to say. I really don't. It doesn't feel like it represents anything at all vaguely reasonable. And to me, I don't know if it was that historical bias or I'm just too stupid, but the gameplay was also not, you know, I was not able to get past that barrier of, well, what the fuck's the union supposed to do? Kind of wish my wife were alive because I would give her the union and see what she did because she was good at figuring shit like that out in ways that I don't know. They almost seemed like she'd reach into the ether and pull these weird answers out that like are the solution to these kind of things, that aren't like, you know, from deep study of the game or anything. Like I've had other friends who are like, I can break this way. No, it was just sort of like it just felt like it came natural to her to find these things. Sometimes it didn't work, sometimes it worked. On the other hand, of course, you know, I'd be like, well, the union is much harder, so I'll take them. Yeah, so we probably wouldn't. But yeah, I don't know. But something that pretends to be about something, and I don't care whether the designer says, you know, whether it's a simulation or not. It is supposed to be about the subject matter. It really shouldn't defy all expectations the way it does. And it's a pity, because again, I was enjoying the gameplay aspect of it. It's just when I start to analyze what I would have to do, you know, I was enjoying the gameplay. I was enjoying trying to reproduce something similar to you know, strategies. And the truth of the matter is the Confederates are just too capable of beating the shit out of the Union and holding ground. That's the whole thing here. The Confederates would win battles but have to withdraw regularly. They would have to give ground because they were outnumbered in too many cases. Outnumbered, outflanked. And the only place where you can see that happening is on the East Coast. I mean, there's a place in the West that you could see it happening too, I guess. But yeah, it does not feel like you have to give ground in it. It feels like the Confederates with their first deck can just pretty much say no to anything like a close in strength force. And some of that has to do with the combat system too. How it's not entirely deterministic, but also not entirely deterministic, but not serving the roles that you'd think it would be. So, for example, leadership. You know, so you have nothing completely random, right? The attacker piles his forces together, comes up with what he thinks is a good attack number. And you could say the same about Dune, right? Where you're both picking a number. The defender can make a decision of, I cannot lose this battle if I play X general, X supporting cards, etc. I will win. Now, what I'm hoping, you know, in terms of the balance thing, is that I'm not just a brilliant Confederate defender. I doubt that. You know, there's just too many people who like this, right? But, you know, the idea of the Confederates not wasting resources and just keeping their defensive cards up and making sure, because you're only going to lose half your force each time, right? And you can replenish that as long as your force is fairly small. Yeah. Where was I? I was somewhere. I got derailed, and by myself, not by the battery dying. The battery dying, I kept my thought, but then I derailed myself with this other thought. But yeah, it feels to whatever is going to come out of this, you really, again, without time as a reference, it's hard to pinpoint and say, oh, well, this is unreasonable. But that first deck, there's there's two reshuffles in the game. That first deck has to be at least, the first year of the war or so. And a lot more happened in the first year of the war or so than the Union seems capable of doing. And I don't know what you're abstracting away, Yeah. All right. So I guess what I'm saying is the game charmed me until I realized what I would have to do and how much I would have to violate history to let the war continue beyond that first deck. That's the real hitter here. I could have probably ignored the fact that it's not simulating, the Peninsular Campaign and these other things. That rather, and you couldn't even see the Peninsular Campaign. Let me look at the map. I mean, it's hard to do in games, but yeah, it's going to be hard because you can only land, the only port is Fort Monroe, and you'd have to use naval units to move down there, and then you'd have to, well, you could take half of Richmond, which doesn't give you an automatic victory, and then withdraw. But no one in their right mind would do that, right? And it would be really, really almost impossible to get the Army of the Potomac onto the peninsula. Now that's true, that's true in a lot of games. I'm not sure that I know of one where it handles the Peninsular Campaign well. But here it's just almost unbelievably impossible, but yeah. I don't know. I feel like I was having a lot of fun playing the cards and everything, and then once I realized how I would have to play the game, massing armies of sizes that just did not clash in some of those early fights. And even then, I'm still not convinced. I'm still not convinced because you would have to outmass the forces available to the Confederates to survive that attack. I mean, you need overwhelming advantages to overcome the defensive cards that they might have. I was actually gaining ground better the first time I played. Where I focused on the blockade rather than the second time. But I was also playing the Confederates where they were making counterattacks, which I don't think they want to do. I think they want to focus on defending their territory as much as possible, building the forts, making sure those 2 victory points don't fall, which kind of leads me to a Hail Mary pass to try to win a naval battle and get one of those 2-point spaces real easy. An invasion battle. I mean, you can do it. You can get 2 units down there and you can have a chance of winning. But it is still a Hail Mary. You're still facing that if the Confederates have, and they usually do, a good enough defensive setup, they can break you. And so they can usually win whatever battle they want to. So you kind of have to drain their hand by losing to them in a battle, and then you've pushed the diplomacy down. Diplomacy is how I lost this game. I actually don't know where else it would have gone. It was feeling close to the edge anyway, because of all the losses I had taken. Because the Confederate deck just keeps replenishing itself with like powerful leaders Powerful leaders and powerful defensive cards. And I'm just not convinced that, you know, unless you can get overwhelming force that you can guarantee that you can beat his, say, 5-point leader plus 2-point high ground, how are you gonna be able to push things in? And when you make those big battles, if you judged wrong, if you did it as, well, he probably can't do this, well, boy, are you going to pay the price on the diplomacy chart, as well as losing half your army for fighting that battle. Anyway, like I said, I'm probably too stupid to play this game. Even looking at it as a game, I just feel stymied as to how the Union can possibly make it through their first deck, and I am so discouraged, after having tried anything that felt vaguely historical, to what the alternatives might be for them winning this. But again, I'm lacking that bluffing factor. I'm lacking the ability to kind of plan because of playing solo and because of who I am. So, maybe this is just like not the kind of game for me. On the other hand, it seems like I'm prying up pieces that wouldn't be pleasant for most players. Might be okay for a Eurogamer who doesn't know much about the Civil War. But clearly you can't use your knowledge of the Civil War to help you play this.